Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joseph Fitzgerald. I'm the Acting Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy here in Port of Spain. We're glad you can join us this afternoon for a very important conversation on women in leadership. Since it is Women History Month, we at the Embassy thought it would be a good idea to have a conversation with some of our women leaders at the Embassy to talk about some of the challenges that are still ongoing, but also some of the things that we're doing right, and how we can get better going forward within the State Department. So with that, let's go ahead and meet the panel.
So, hi everyone. My name is Mauricio, Richardson, Lillian. I am the protocol assistant at the U.S. Embassy. I am married with two wonderful girls, and eventually at some point in time I will be taking care of my parents, I'm sure. For me, leadership means using what God has given me, so it's my skills, knowledge, and abilities to work in tandem with others to create a positive outcome. That's what leadership means to me.
Hi, I am the housing coordinator at U.S. Embassy Port of Spain. I work directly with the General Services Officer, and I've been at the Embassy for 17 years. I come from a really large, close-knit family in central Trinidad, and I have a partner for the last 16 years. To me, leadership is an action word where there's this leader who brings together all these relevant parties that will work on a project and achieve a particular goal. And most important to me is that the leader must be able to communicate a vision to others, communicate a path forward, be decisive when they act. They must be able to relate to others and also be sensitive in working in the environment with other people.
And now we have Patricia.
Yes. Yes, I'm Patricia Veitia. I'm the CDP advisor here in Trinidad and Tobago. I do have two grown boys, one actually working for CDP, currently over in El Paso, Texas, and my other son with OIT. I have 6 granddaughters, no boys, right? I have the boys and they have the girls. So I do come also from a large family, a family of 8, and I'm the third of the 8. So. We are a very close family ourselves too. And for me, leadership is someone who is willing to break through and, go up to the surface, actually show responsibility and integrity too.
My name is Yvette Rush. I'm the Regional Security Officer here at the U.S. Embassy Port of Spain with Diplomatic Security. I am married. My husband is also with the government, so we spend a lot of time geographically separated. I have 3 girls. I also come from not a large immediate family, but a very large family, and I can foresee in the future having to take care of a parent or another family member at some point in time. Leadership, exactly what everybody has said here. I think everyone has hit on the key points of leadership, but I also think it's not only of having that mission and that goal, but also recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses as a leader or as a manager, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of your peers, colleagues, subordinates, and supervisors, and leveraging those to work together to come out with a common goal.
So, good afternoon, everyone. So yes, I'm Noreen Nelia, Acting Public Affairs Officer here at the U.S. Embassy. So I am here on my own with my 2 cats, but I am here as a single officer, which comes with its own challenges in terms of managing to keep that balance between, the work and the life, but also with the idea that, for me at least, leadership means not just taking care of the mission goal or achieving the mission goal, but taking care of the people around you in such a way that that you are creating leaders as you're being a leader as well. So that's for me is an important part of leadership.
Wonderful. Well, I think I was struck by listening to you all just define leadership and talking about your family situations. And at least 2 of you have said, I can foresee me taking care of an elderly parent in the future. And I just would like to follow up on that real briefly, if you don't mind. I think part of that is probably because you are leaders, right? And when you see something that needs to be done, especially something about someone you care about, you want to step forward and do it. But I'm wondering, do you have siblings, including brothers or sisters, who would also help in that challenge? And if not, why do you think not? And how could that culture be changed? I think it's a bit of an unfair assumption that the sisters are always going to take care of the parents, and while the brothers are left alone to live their lives. So, any thoughts anyone can have on that? But I focus on you two because I remember that you specifically.
And I didn't mention that, but that is also something I'm looking at. But one thing is I'm one of only 2 sisters, so I do think that can be an equal partnership there. And I'm the younger one, so I often do think that it falls a little bit more on the older one, especially if she's only 3 hours away from my parents, whereas I'm in another continent most of the time. So I do believe that. But ironically, that has resulted in actually my parents coming and staying with me for longer periods of time because they have to travel further, so they stay longer. And so there's, I have like 4 pairs of my parents' like bedroom slippers in any given house that I have, things like that. But it is an issue, and I will say that I have seen it definitely fall on women more than men, and in some cases daughters-in-law more than sons. And so it is an issue. And what I have committed to is that it will never fall 100% on my sister or 100% on me. It has to be a 50-50 partnership. So it has to be something I think about and able to do, because I've seen it with my grandparents. It's a lot of work for one person. It is a lot of work. And I would not want to make my sister take on that and build up any kind of resentment or difficulty over that issue.
I have seen that in relationships where one sibling kind of takes on everything, and unfairly so, and it does at times build resentment. Yvette, have you had a discussion with your siblings about that particular issue?
I have not, and I've seen it. My mom takes care of my grandma who has dementia, and it's very difficult on the caregiver because they don't get a break. I could foresee it being me, the one that would take responsibility over one of my parents, because of the fact that sometimes it's the dynamics of the family, the daughter-in-law, how well she gets along with my mom. My other brother is not married and not financially stable, so I'd kind of be the de facto person that she would come live with. Now, if it's my dad, we're going to draw straws. And I'm probably going to go with one of my brothers just because of his strong personality and my equally strong personality. That probably wouldn't last very long. But always willing to help. Right?
Yeah. In my case, I'm an only child, so it's automatically me. There's nobody else.
For me, it's a little bit different because it's my sister and I, and my father is actually taking the responsibility of taking care of my mother, who has Alzheimer's, and he's more or less planned it all. He's planned well who's living with them, and it takes the burden out of us, but at the same time, it's still a situation of still looking out for them in spite of what plans they've made for themselves, because you're in that caring situation there towards the end of their life. And other than that, it's basically my sister and I looking out for each other and for the other ones because we're older.
If you wouldn't mind describing any kind of particular leadership challenges that you think you have faced, especially as a woman, that perhaps a man doesn't have to deal with, and if you have any recommendations. I think there's lots of us men who, and I just had this conversation with a friend recently, fitting into the white and male category, we benefit from a lot of privileges if we want to or not, and a lot of us consider ourselves allies, but we don't possibly do enough, and we think of ourselves as woke, but maybe we're not as awoken or awakened as we think we would be. So any kind of advice you might have for how we can overcome some of those leadership challenges?
Okay, yes, I have faced many challenges as a woman in my role as a housing coordinator, because I deal with, I think, a very male environment of contractors and the owners, and we have male maintenance staff, we have an array of different personalities at the embassy. The main challenge I face is not, as I was saying to someone, not empowerment to do my job. It is actually the gender versus ability to do your job basis. So you find that that people you deal with don't appreciate or acknowledge that you're able to do the job that you're assigned to do, and they almost weaken your ability with others in a work environment to perform your job. So for example, I've had people who've been demeaning of my position, not really saying that, you know, you can really spearhead a housing management project. And then I have contractors who would, for example, you tell them the guidelines and what's expected based on your experience of working with the U.S. Embassy, and they do what they want to do in the end. And then you see them interacting with your male counterparts, and it's a little bit different. That's when you identify there's a gender gap where I work. Now, I think that there are lots of, you know, not specifically decent work environment in the embassy, because we do a lot for our staff, but I work with outside as well. And in the outside environment, you find that that there needs to be, honestly, more respect in the work environment. Because as when you look at a leader is supposed to work with discipline, with order, but mainly respect. Because if you respect what I do and my job, it means that it will eliminate things, biases and prejudices and all these ideas. And you want to see men in the environment do more of that, and also women. Because it's been risky saying that, but I have identified that women see men with biases who are maybe their bosses, and they say nothing about it, and they let a lot of women be treated with bias. And even that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and, I remember I have a friend who wrote just something recently called How to Be a Good Ally. And there's several things that she put in her list, that things that made me think, like, do I do that? You know, and one of them is things like, and housekeeping, when it comes to like housekeeping items, like who's going to throw the next party? Do you automatically assume like the women in the room are going to step forward and do that for you? And one thing she suggested is, when you, as a good leader, you should take the time to think about that, make a roster, so duties are often shared more equitably. But I think you're absolutely right. It's important for us all, men and women, when we see bias, to point it out and try to correct it. Mauricio, same question. Any kind of unique leadership challenges you've faced as a woman?
I think for me, I faced the issue where I've been asked to be on a project, but yet still, because I'm female and I've got to have male colleagues, the supervisor may tend to either act as if they hear the male colleague more, or what they're saying more, as opposed to my contribution. And then the same male colleague might take the same point that I just made, say the exact same thing, and be recognized. So that's the challenge that I've faced.
And I just learned that has a specific word called mansplaining,
Yes.
right? Where a man colleague steals the work of someone else and gets recognized.
Yes,
But
yes. That's for sure is one of my main challenge.
I think that I've been really fortunate to have a lot of really good leaders that I've worked for that have been male, that look at you as for your capabilities. Certainly there have been some challenges. I think it is interesting when I go to a new office, like a social event, and maybe I've just recently arrived, and if my husband's with me, I take him with me. They all assume that he is the employee and
Right.
that I'm the spouse, and they're like, "Oh, how do you know so and so?" or "How long have you been here?" And I don't know. My wife works here. So there's always that de facto. But I also see that myself when I'm at an event and I meet somebody. I try to mentally not assume that the male is the employee. I work in a very male-predominant workplace in my career, and it's only been about 14% female across the board. They're doing more to recruit, but we do even have our own biases as females walking in. But seeing that, and one of the challenges is sometimes having to prove yourself twice, that you got the job based on merit and capabilities. So you have to go in and like work twice as hard to show that you belong there. And then when everyone realizes it, then you can just keep going on and doing your job accordingly, and then they look for you for help. But going to the range or any type of training exercise, if something goes wrong, sometimes you're like, oh, who was that? Like I remember in our high threat training, somebody flipped a vehicle over, and so we all stopped our vehicles and we ran out to help. And as I'm running, I hear, oh, I wonder, it was probably Yvette driving because I was the only female in the class. And I look over and I said, well, you would be wrong if you wanted to bet money on it. And they just turned beet red because that was the assumption that they made. That I don't know if it's just because they didn't think females could drive, or because I was the only female, or they're saying it in jest. But then that corrected a lot of any potential problems moving forward once they saw that.
Yeah.
Noreen?
No, and I think it goes to that proving yourself, because it is, when somebody doubts your capabilities, it becomes really difficult to believe you have the right to be in the room, to believe you have the authority to make decisions. And I remember I had that same experience of that person who would repeat every point I made at every meeting we had as a staff at one of my previous jobs. And I had started to wonder, am I not expressing myself? Am I being quiet? Is no one able to hear me? Because not one single person in the meeting, and there were 25 people in the room, ever said, you're repeating Noreen's point. Not one person. And yet sometimes people would come up to me afterwards and said, he's repeating what you're saying. And I'm like, could you say that in the meeting once and just validate this? What is the point? Because it's like your voice is taken away from you to a point where it's very hard for you to be the person who says something. And so it becomes hard for you to advocate for yourself when you feel like you're not being heard. You need that other person to advocate for you. And that's where I think both men and women leaders can be allies to other women leaders, is just to validate their presence, to make them feel like they have a place in the room and authority to make decisions and do all those things. And I still remember one of the first bosses I had in the State Department back when I was an intern, I think, 14 years ago. And I still remember somebody was refusing to give me some information, and they said, no, I'm going to talk to your bosses, you're an intern. And I can still remember hearing him pick up the phone and say, you never speak to a member of my staff that way. And that is the kind of leader I want to be, who advocates for their staff to that extent, that says, even though that person is higher up than he is, he's like, nope, you don't talk to a member of my staff that way, you respect them. And I think that was some of the best leadership I've seen.
For sure.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk a little bit about glass ceilings? We know they still exist. They're coming down one by one, and we're very, I think many of us in the United States are very proud that we have a very impressive Vice President, Kamala Harris. But we haven't had a president yet. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, I think you guys can hold your head with a little bit of pride in that you have a woman president, and you've also had a woman prime minister before. But the U.S. is still struggling, and maybe one day we'll reach that goal too. But what do you think it would mean, not just for those Americans in the room, but for the world, if the United States elected a female leader? Maybe we'll start with Noreen this time.
So I didn't grow up in the U.S. I'm an American citizen from birth, but didn't grow up in the U.S. But I have very visceral memories of I grew up in a military dictatorship, and seeing that dictatorship fall and the first female prime minister of a democratic Muslim country elected. It was amazing. And 20 years later, I watch recordings of her getting assassinated. And despite everything she'd done, and there's a lot of corruption and other stories associated with her, and I'm not going to go into whether or not they're true, because that's not for me to determine, but despite all of that, that moment of seeing her assassinated was such it broke my heart, because I had seen her, I'd seen her get rid of a military dictatorship and fight for democracy, and having it be someone who was from the same city that I was living in, who had gone to the same school I was going to, whose children were at the same school I was at, all of that does make a big difference. It's so hard to see glass ceilings if you can see someone doing it. If you have that role model in front of you, whatever they may do, wrong or right, they don't have to be the perfect leader. Men don't have to be perfect leaders. Women shouldn't have to be either. And but seeing that it is possible, that it is even something that somebody who went to your school did, that it can't be replaced. So I do think whenever it happens, and hopefully soon, it will be it will be momentous. And I think it'll say that we actually do believe in what we say, and that young girls in the United States will grow up knowing that something is possible, as opposed to believing it could be. They will know it is possible because they'll have seen it. So, yeah, that's my personal belief on that.
Mauricio?
For me, I think if that were to happen, it would represent for all females everywhere that you've reached the pinnacle of power. For there to be a female president of the U.S., I think would be remarkable. I think it would be, I can't even put it into words how much of an impact this will have and repercussions throughout all the world in terms of having a female president of the U.S. For little children, for young girls, even for young boys, the fact that you can actually see, okay, so little girls can aspire to this, or young ladies can aspire to that. It's a matter of reaching to the top of the pinnacle of power. And I think that's wonderful. And I know eventually it's going to happen.
When you consider that the United States has been to the forefront in identifying and defining female challenges to leadership, you look at the CEOs in the United States and you have chairwomen, you have major CEOs of major corporations. There's nothing really stopping a female from becoming a president of the United States. And I believe if you did get a female president at Pennsylvania Avenue, it will actually serve to narrow the gender gap that we're experiencing. I think that person will be able to address it because she would have had the experience of going through what we're going through and experiencing right now, and bring that to the forefront. And I think as a global leader, she'll be able to impact, because the Americans are so to the forefront globally, every sector, and I think every strata of society. Because sometimes when we discuss gender issues, we may discuss it at this higher level, but it starts at a very root level with kids, where in school they feel and they see and they're taught different things, and it doesn't really isolate or identify what is right in terms of gender and how they should appreciate themselves. But I think a female president would make a difference all the way down, because she would have experienced what we go through.
Maybe on a similar vein, we all know that there's a pay gap between male and females in most, not all countries. I think there's probably a few that have significantly narrowed that gap. In the U.S., I think it's still there. I believe it's still there for Trinidad and Tobago too. Famously, our women's soccer team is suing for equal rights. They're obviously much more successful than the male team, although not knocking the male team either. It's tough competition, but it's the old slogan, equal pay for equal work, and it's still not there yet. Just would be curious to some of your thoughts on what's holding that back, and how we might be able to overcome that, if at all.
I did read an interesting article that said one of the issues with the gender pay gap is that a lot of times, and I don't know studies-wise if this is true or not, that a lot of times the male colleagues would be offered X amount and they'll push back on it. Where a female colleague is saying, well, I'm just happy to get the job, I'll accept it, and then hopefully continue to rise in the ranks and then get that pay as time goes on. So I'm not sure if there's not enough pushback, not saying, okay, this is my worth, this is what I want, and maybe our male colleagues are doing that a little bit more.
I mean, it's an interesting question because it's also one gender and then it's racial as well. So I think that gap becomes bigger when you look at people of color. Women of color are paid less than white women, but white women are paid less than men of color. It's just who are paid less than white men. So it's I think there is definitely an element of that. I know, however, I heard actually when I was back home most recently, someone told me that one of my previous jobs, it had come out that women were paid less than men, but that was post 2010. And I'm sitting there thinking, this was a job I would never have guessed that. Now, I'm not going to go back and compare paychecks at this point, but I'm just sitting there thinking, that was several years of my life in a job that I had no idea that was going on, and we were doing the exact same work. We all had the same education, everything, and we were starting at the same level. And to me, just knowing that was actually just incredible shocking. I just had no idea that happened. But with this work, I know we do start with this option of being able to negotiate our salary to a point when you come in, and I do remember hearing that you could negotiate it after I had accepted it. So it was one of those things where I was like, are there rules written down somewhere that I'm just not aware of? Is that on me? Is that on the organization?
It seems for whatever reason, society and culture says that men are better performers than women. So therefore, based on that, they are paid a certain amount. And women who are thought of less, or in terms of having less capacity to do the same job, they are paid less. And I think it's a matter of people and senior leaders and those in authority to realize that we can do and perform just as well as or even better than our male counterparts, and we should be, in all rightful fairness and equality, be paid the same salary. But we have a long way to go before we actually get to that point. And for other people that you speak with, you may never know, because it's not like a gentleman will come and say, you're doing the same job, and discuss what the salary is. You may never know. Look at Noreen, she found out years later. But we have a long way to go, but I think we're getting there. Slowly, but we're getting there.
Yes. Well, I think we're coming up on the end of our time, but I think maybe we can start with the question of what do you think we should do as a society to be able to empower the next generation of women leaders? Put that open to the floor.
I think that's a lot of mentorship. We're in the positions we're in right now, and not just working with young girls, but working with young boys too, so that they can be, as you've said earlier, be allies to empower women, to see women as equals in everyday society and in the workplace.
I think it's like being a coach and mentor. Share your experiences with other staff members.
Yeah, I think that there's been a foundation already laid, and there have been successful women in different avenues of life. And Noreen said that it made such a difference and impact on her life that she will not forget somebody who's successful, a successful woman, being relatable, part of her environment. And I grew up not having mentors and not having people when I was in school, and you had to find your way. But I believe that if younger children, younger girls, teenagers are able to relate to people who are successful, and they mentor them, and there are programs where they relate to them and share the experience with both males and females, that it will give a basis where people can have hope and actually see there's a chance that I can challenge this bias and overcome it.
I think that we need to have, and use, in TNT we have a lot of community centers, and we have church groups, we have music groups, we have football groups, we have football clubs. They're little pockets of areas where you can find children. And I'm thinking that not just secondary school level, definitely in the primary school level, you can create safe places for these children to come and share and talk. Not everybody's going to immediately feel comfortable, but we want to create that kind of environment, the enabling environment, where we can share and help each other along. I think for young children, we need to ensure that they can talk, they can communicate, they feel safe to share. Like the old adage say, if it is that I tell you how to do something, so if I give you fish, then I feed you for a day. But if I teach you how to fish, then I feed you for life. I think we need to ensure that we show children the steps that it would take, albeit however long it might take, but we show children steps to get to their solutions on their own. You recognize that you have a problem, but there is a certain strategy or several strategies that you can employ so you can get better and solve your problem with our assistance. So I'm a strong believer in coaching, I'm a strong believer in mentorship, but I think we need to start from the primary school level and move up. Because if we catch them at that age, more than likely, they may stay on the straight path.
I think, though, I completely agree with starting young, but even within an organization, mentorship and leadership training, it's so key. Providing opportunities for professional development, showing people, helping them explain the system. And I know Chargé d'Affaires Chantimore recently mentioned that some of the reason that a lot of people of color did not progress traditionally in the State Department was they didn't quite understand everything they had to tick off the list in order to reach that senior level of the Foreign Service. And I do think that's something that leadership training, I do think there are certain people who have had that opportunity based on where they come from, their background, socioeconomic background, that often there is a bit more of that, but then in other communities that is a little harder to find. And so if for those that you can start at the beginning, great, but for those who you've missed along the way, we do need to have every organization, I think, a little more dedicated to building its leaders from the beginning from the first day they start on the job.
Okay, well, this has been a really fabulous conversation. I want to thank everybody on the distinguished panel for your thoughts, and I think we all can get a lot from this. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.